Podcast today's show at rte.ie/today with Sean O'Rourke.
Now, there's a news conference expected shortly in Las Vegas with an update from the police about that shooting in which at least 20 people have been killed. We'll be keeping an eye and an ear to it, and if there's any developments, we'll bring them to you before the end of the programme at noon. Meanwhile, the UK's biggest ever peacetime repatriation operation is underway in an effort to return home 110,000 Monarch Airlines customers. This follows the collapse of the airline early this morning. 300,000 other intending passengers have had their bookings cancelled. Joining me now, the editor of Travel Extra magazine, Eoghan Corry. Eoghan, this had been coming, I suppose, if the airline had losses of nearly £300 million last year.
It had a big wobble exactly a year ago, Sean. Aircraft were returned to Luton, where the base is, from all over Europe, and at the end of September, it did look like it wouldn't get through. It did actually get a boost, an extra investment, and almost exactly a year later, it happened at 3 o'clock to 3:30 a.m. this morning. This is the way it works, really. The peak summer period is over. You're now looking into the softer, where the revenue is not going to be as fat, and it is clear that this was something they were trying to avoid and trying to struggle through, but at 3:30 a.m. they just ran out of money.
But Eoghan, I mean, it's quite perplexing, or maybe there are explanations that you'll be able to share with us. The previous year they made a profit of nearly £27 million for the previous 12 months, turned into a loss of 291. How did that happen?
The big rescue, the decision was to go get rid of their long haul. They used to do, they did a lot of services to Mexico, places like that, and they got rid of all of their long haul, went into short haul. They were concentrating, the letter, Andrew Swaffield wrote, his letter to his staff mentions that they'd looked to Turkey, Tunisia, Egypt, places like that for the extra revenue in the plan about 3 years ago. Obviously all of those disappeared on them. Most of their business then was to Portugal, where I am now, and Spain, and they just found that they were winning a battle for numbers. They were actually flying 14% more passengers, but they were losing. They were getting £100 million, English sterling pounds, less in revenue, just because of the sheer pressure of competing against Ryanair and EasyJet. So what was happening was they were actually growing their passengers, but getting less revenue from them. They then made a frantic effort in the last few months to try and refocus on long haul, something that Air Berlin and people like that have been trying to do, and it just was too late to change, having switched all the way back to go back to the other end of the spectrum. So it's all about yields, it's all about revenue. We've seen Ryanair's average fare fall below €40 this year for the first time since 2007, and it is really, really squeezing the rivals, and this is the first rival to collapse.
Yeah, and I suppose, as you mentioned, those terror attacks in Turkey and Egypt are depriving the airline of large chunks of its annual revenue. Now, how big a player were they? I mean, I think they carried, was it 5 million passengers last year?
5 million they wouldn't be in the league.
6.3, I think. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, they would be half the size of Aer Lingus, to put it in an Irish perspective. What we've seen though is that EasyJet and to a huge extent Ryanair have taken the lion's share of the market for that end of the market, and it's made it very, very small for the smaller players very, very hard for the smaller players to hang in there. They have a fleet of about 35 aircraft. They would have been used at various stages by some of the Irish tour operators. People would have seen it in Dublin Airport, but they would have been used on a charter basis. Some of their business was on a charter basis. They also had a scheduled business, largely out of England. Luton was their base, and a few of those aircraft will be of interest to people in Dublin this morning because they're leased from Irish companies. But it is being done in a reasonably orderly way. The aircraft have been returned, and the English equivalent of the Commission of Aviation Regulation had a statement out very, very quickly saying that they're effectively assembling an airline on their own to bring the 100,000, 110,000 people home that are stranded abroad. That's the first primary duty of care to customers is actually getting them home. They get involved in a lot of other things, and they've at least brought in aircraft from people like Qatar this morning.
Might there be a silver lining here somewhere for the likes of Michael O'Leary? Might there be a load of pilots now to be hired?
It's an interesting one because one of the other decisions they made, they're an Airbus airline, one of the other decisions was to put 45 Boeing 737s on the order book. They're due for delivery. In fact, the first one has arrived. There will be 200 pilots out of work this morning, and if you knew anyone that was looking for pilots at the moment, Sean, you might give them a call. I would also expect someone from Ryanair to be on the phone to Seattle saying, I hear you've lost 45 of your Boeing orders. Any chance of a deal?
Right, Eoghan, we shall leave it there. Thanks indeed for that analysis. That's Eoghan Corry there, editor of Travel Extra magazine.